Hello, I'm Caleb Azor. I'm from Auckland, New Zealand, and I really love trees. Um, so today I'm talking about how trees care for their young, and not only their young, but the young of other trees. So some people know this. To some people, this is amazing new stuff. Um, that all trees in a forest, or just any group of trees, it could be just two trees in a field, and that they have this between each other, would be linked. So underground, their roots all grow through the soil. That much everyone knows. But in the soil, there's also fungi. So fungi like mushrooms, and the mushrooms are only the. It's just my dog boots. um, and the mushrooms are just the fruiting bodies of the fungi. They are only a small part of the actual fungi. Most of the fungi is mycelium that creeps through the soil, and many different types of fungi, and so the different types do different things. Um, they could be anything from ones that decompose rotting material to ones that attack living trees and kill them, to ones that attack living animals and infect them, or ones that take insects and kill them. There's all sorts of different fungi. But most fungi are most fungi just live in the soil and are harmless, decompose dead organic material in the soil and on the soil. And a lot of these fungi, many different species of fungi and all around the world, will form a symbiosis with plant roots, where the mycelium will actually connect with the plant roots in such a way that there'll be nutrients and water and minerals, all the elements that plants need from the soil, and they'll be flowing between them. So the trees will be um, feeding, well, because the trees are plants and they produce sugars, so they'll be feeding those sugars to the fungi, which cannot photosynthesize and cannot produce sugars. And then the mycelium are finer and more widespread in the soil, so they can take in more water and nutrients from the soil, which they then feed in return to the tree. But these mycelium take this a step further. They will link the trees to their neighbors, so that in a forest all the trees will be linked by the roots, by the mycelial network. This is called the wood wide web. And this mycelial network is amazing. It will extend the entire forest or group of trees, no matter how big or small that may be, and be all these mycelium growing through soil and working, as I said, with the trees, but also linking the trees with each other. So this then allows trees to send nutrients and sugars and that sort of thing between the trees, as well as messages. So the trees can warn each other about danger and warn each other about if they're under attack by something, so that the other trees can get started with their defenses before the threat actually reaches them. And then also there's the older trees, not the older trees, the stronger trees will feed weaker trees. So if a tree is under stress and struggling, the other trees will feed it. And so it's like a community in which they pull all their resources, feeding each other, and so the strongest give more and the weakest take more. Sorry, I just had to pause it because of the lawnmower across the road making a lot of noise. So the trees, the stronger trees will give to the weaker trees and support them through the stress and times of need, and then the weaker trees will be able to recover, and they'll be able to continue to give to their tree community, which is a really beautiful thing. It's just like the perfect society is trees. And so the minerals and nutrients from the soil that the trees need, as well as sugars, will flow via this mycelial network. And then also electrical messages and warnings and that kind of thing, so they can communicate with each other. So that's how the mature adult trees interact with each other. So what about the young trees? So in a forest, all the trees will, most trees will on a yearly basis. Some trees will be like certain trees in New Zealand that do the mast, and only every few years they will do it. But most trees will be every year, and otherwise will be every few years, or whatever the cycle will be of that particular type of tree, in which they will produce seeds, and they will spread out the seeds. Now, they produce lots of seeds. Most trees will produce hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds every time they do. But most of these won't grow. But the ones that do, the little seedlings, will germinate in the forest floor, and as they should do naturally, under the canopy of their parents and their fellow trees of the forest, basically underneath mature trees. And then they will, when they germinate on the forest floor, they will, as they send their roots down, will immediately link into that mycelial network. So now they're part of it. So the mature trees will then the mother trees, so the trees that they're underneath, particularly, would be like the one that often it'll be the mother of those seedlings. Sometimes it won't be, and they will care for their own young, so that the mother tree will recognize its own children and care for those children particularly. But they will also feed and care for the other children, and all the trees will be like this, so they're all looking after their young, the young of each other. So they will link into this mycelial network, and then the trees, the parent trees, will do two things, or the mature trees, which will be acting as the parents. Okay, this is just a disturbance, noise disturbance. Okay, sorry, just noise disturbance again. Just to clarify, that mature trees of any kind, of any species, will care for the seedlings of any trees, any species. Well, almost all. There's maybe a few exceptions, but almost all of them will care for any babies of any species. The trees will recognize their own offspring, as in their own flesh and blood, as it were, but obviously trees. They'll recognize that they're their children, and they will tend to care for them particularly. However, they will care for all young trees that happen to be growing beneath them. So they will feed them with nutrients and sugars and really look after them really well. But they will look after their own particularly, but they will look after all of them. So they will recognize their children and care for them, but all young trees will be cared for by the mature trees, and they'll certainly be doing far better away from the parent trees than they'll be certainly doing far better with the support of these foster parent trees than they would be if they didn't have that support. They'll do far better with the support. And another really interesting thing that the trees will do is they will, it's going to sound very contradictory, but they what's the best way of saying it? They stunt them. They suppress their growth. And you might think, oh, what? They stunt them? They suppress their growth? That's terrible. That's not helpful. But actually, it's very, very helpful, because trees are long-lived beings. They naturally live a long time. And so for a tree, it is desirable to live as long as possible for that species. So, with a tree, the slower it grows as a young tree, the longer its lifespan will ultimately be. So by stunting and suppressing the growth of the seedlings, those mature trees will be ensuring that if and when those seedlings reach maturity, they will live a much longer ultimate lifespan, which is greatly to the benefit of those trees. So they do all this for all of the seedlings that grow beneath them. So that's basically how trees care for their young. It's a really amazing, beautiful thing. And then apart from the actual tree's deliberate caring for the young, there's also environmental conditions created by mature trees that care for the young. And these aren't exactly the tree going out and deliberately doing that like it is with feeding them and stunting them. It's just a consequence of being in the trees and getting that benefit. So, underneath a canopy of forest, there'll be leaflets on the ground, nutrient rich, nice, rich, and soft and really nice soil for the young seedlings' roots to grow into. And so that's a very beneficial condition of that. And then there's also the shade and shelter from too much sun, from too much wind. There's also suppression of weeds. Mature trees will suppress the weeds from most weeds from growing beneath them, so there'll be a much clearer space for the young trees. And yeah, and also the water. So the shade and canopy of the trees will make it a little bit more humid in there, so that the young seedlings don't dry out too much. Particularly helpful when there's a hot, dry summer or something like that, which might mean that young seedling, which hasn't got a big established root system yet, might not be getting as much water as it could do with. But that humidity would help a little bit with that. So all of these benefits of mature trees of any species for seedlings of any species, they don't discriminate. The only thing that they do recognize is their own children, which they care for particularly. Other than that, they simply care for all seedlings equally, which means that a tree of one species will not care for seedlings of its own species, if they're not its children, more than they would care for trees of other species. So it's a really beautiful, wonderful thing. There we go.